There are many examples in history where countries use different approaches on global trade. While every example should be regarded with historical context, it is impossible to dismiss great benefits or losses from those approaches. Here are 6 examples where high tariffs benefited its country. Side note: I am not promoting or demoting any policy. Number 1. The U.S. Tariff of 1816. In the years after the War of 1812 between U.S. and British Empire, the United States was trying to stand on its own economically. But there was a problem for U.S. After the war, Britain wanted to regain its merchants' trade power and curtail growing American power. Due to this, British manufacturers started to send shiploads of cheap goods, especially textiles and iron, into American ports. These imports were so cheap that they threatened to wipe out the country's small but growing industries. In 1816, Congress decided to take action by passing the first protective tariff in U.S. history. It placed up to 30% duties on imported products to give local businesses a chance to survive and grow. The move worked. Factories in places like New England and Pennsylvania began to expand. Investors started putting money into American manufacturing, and thousands of jobs were created. What started as a short-term fix turned into the beginning of a long-term strategy. The tariff helped launch what became known as the American System, a set of policies designed to strengthen the national economy through protectionism, infrastructure investment, and financial stability. For a young country trying to reduce its reliance on Europe, this was a major turning point. Number 2. 1879 German tariffs under Bismarck. By the late 1870s, Germany was still a young empire recently unified under Prussian leadership. But its economy was under pressure. A global agricultural crisis had driven down grain prices, and cheap imports, especially from the United States and Russia, were undercutting German farmers. At the same time, the country's industrial base, particularly steel and coal, was still developing and vulnerable to foreign competition. In 1879, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck made a strategic shift. He abandoned free trade and introduced protective tariffs on both agricultural goods and industrial products. The goal was twofold: shield domestic farmers from cheap grain imports and support heavy industry, especially iron and steel production, which was critical for Germany's military and infrastructure goals. The effects were significant. German agriculture stabilized, especially in the east where large landowners were hit hardest. More importantly, the industrial sector grew rapidly. With protection from foreign competition, German companies invested in modernizing steel mills, building railroads, and expanding coal mining. These industries became central to Germany's rise as a European powerhouse in the decades to follow. By the turn of the century, Germany had become Europe's leading steel producer, outpacing even Britain in some areas. Politically, the tariff gave Bismarck a powerful coalition. He gained the support of conservative landowners in the countryside and industrial capitalists in the cities, helping him strengthen the empire's social and economic stability. Number 3. 1899 to 1912 Meiji Tariff Reforms. In the mid-1800s, Japan had just emerged from centuries of isolation. But after being forced to sign unequal treaties with Western powers, Japan lost control over its own trade policy. These treaties capped Japan's tariffs at very low levels, usually around 5%, which left local industries exposed to cheap Western imports. As a result, Japan couldn't protect its economy or raise revenue through trade. That started to change during the Meiji era, as Japan began a massive modernization effort. In the late 1800s, Japanese diplomats worked to gradually renegotiate these unequal treaties, and by 1899, Japan finally regained full tariff autonomy. With control restored, the government raised tariffs on key imports like textiles, machinery, and steel to protect local industries and encourage domestic production. The results were dramatic. Japanese factories, especially in textiles and heavy industry, began to grow quickly. By shielding their infant industries from cheaper Western competition, Japan was able to develop its own industrial base from the ground up. Railways, shipyards, steelworks, and military industries expanded rapidly. Within just a few decades, Japan transformed from a feudal society into a modern industrial power, and by the early 20th century, it was competing with the West on both economic and military fronts. The Meiji tariff reforms weren't just about protection, They were part of a broader national strategy to catch up with Western powers, and they played a crucial role in Japan's rise as a major force on the global stage. Number 4. South Korea's tariff strategy in 1960s. In the early 1960s, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world, with very little industry and a struggling agricultural economy. But under the leadership of Park Chung-hee, the government launched an aggressive plan to transform the economy, and tariffs played a key role. Instead of fully opening up to free trade, South Korea used a strategy called selective protectionism. The government placed high tariffs and import restrictions on certain sectors it wanted to develop, like steel, shipbuilding, chemicals, and electronics, while also promoting exports through state support. These industries were shielded from foreign competition until they were strong enough to compete internationally. The results were extraordinary. Companies like Hyundai, Samsung, and POSCO, the national steel company, grew rapidly under this protection. With state guidance, cheap loans, and tariff protection, South Korea's economy moved from agriculture to heavy industry in just a few decades. Between 1960 and 1990, South Korea's GDP per capita increased more than tenfold, and the country became a leading exporter of cars, ships, and electronics. Unlike older models of protectionism, South Korea's strategy was temporary and targeted. Once industries became competitive, tariffs were reduced. It was a practical use of trade barriers, not to isolate the country, but to develop domestic strength before competing globally. Number 5. 1980s Brazil's computer tariffs. In the early 1980s, Brazil faced a challenge. The country was heavily dependent on foreign technology, and its domestic computer industry was virtually non-existent. To fix this, the government launched an ambitious policy known as the Market Reserve, which banned the import of foreign-made computers and placed strict tariffs and regulations on international tech companies. The idea was to give local firms time and space to develop their own technology without being crushed by global giants like IBM or Apple. In this protected environment, a number of Brazilian companies began producing domestically made computers, often cloning foreign models using local components. While these machines weren't cutting edge, they were good enough to meet growing demand in education, government, and business. For a time, the strategy worked. Brazil built a native tech industry from scratch, created thousands of skilled jobs, and reduced its dependence on imports. The policy also gave rise to a generation of Brazilian engineers and entrepreneurs with hands-on experience in hardware and software development. But the success was mixed. By the late 1980s, Brazil's tech sector began to lag behind international standards. The protected market limited competition and innovation, and consumers were stuck with overpriced, outdated machines. Eventually, the policy was dismantled, and Brazil opened up to global tech in the early 1990s. Still, the computer tariff experiment is remembered as a bold attempt to build national capabilities in a high-tech sector, and it showed that, under the right conditions, tariffs can give developing countries room to grow in complex industries. And that concludes my list of 5 examples of tariff usage. As you see, there are many examples of protectionist approaches and very different results. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video. Please leave a like and comment for more videos.